We all stand to gain from the survival of the world's tropical forests with their powerful stabilizing effect on the climate. Is there a way of mobilizing international finance and sufficient scale to halt their ongoing destruction? Brazil's government insists that there is, and with just 2 months ago, until the launch of its proposed Global Forest Fund at the COP30 climate summit, we'll soon find out whether it has a chance of success. Making forest protection pay. 5 years ago, during one of the Brazil's worst periods of rainforest destruction, I followed a plume of smoke in the jungle near Boca do Acre, deep in the Amazon region. It led me to a local man named Eslo, who was in the process of boarding a large swath of rainforest for cattle pasture. In this region, there is no other form of income. The problem then, according to Aslo and many experts on deforestation, is largely a simple one of economic incentives. There is money to be made from destroying rainforests, but all too often none of them be made from conserving them. Brazil wants to use its presidency of November's COP30 summit to change that. Through a proposed 125 billion international fund, it has dubbed the Tropical Forest Forever facility. Initially floated by President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in 2023, the plan is to induce wealthy countries to contribute financially to the preservation of tropical forests that, by absorbing huge amounts of carbon, benefit the whole planet. It has always been this idea of how do we mobilize funding at least close to the true value of forest in the world, said Andrea Aquina. It has always been an idea of how do we mobilize funding, head of the Economic Environmental Advisory Office at the Brazilian Environmental Ministry. Crucially, the proposed fund would not rely on donations. Instead, it would be financed entirely by interest-bearing debt, by leveraging public money to raise larger amounts from commercial investors. It would become the world's biggest planned finance vehicle if it can get anywhere close to its target size. Is that a realistic prospect? So the plan is the fund would borrow an initial amount of capital from sponsors, including wealthy nations and potentially other sources such as foundations. This 40 years debt would have a low interest rate matching US Treasury yields. The fund would aim to issue $25 billion of this debt within its first few years of operation. The sponsors would agree to be a junior position in the debt structure, meaning they would take their first hit from any losses. Brazil reckons this would enable the fund to issue a much larger amount of senior debt. The target is $100 billion to pension funds and other commercial investors. The fund would invest in emerging market sovereign and corporate bonds, earning a higher yield than its cost of capital. That should mean that after servicing its interest payments, it would have money left over, roughly $400 billion a year, according to the plan to fund forest conservation. How will that money be distributed? The latest concept document has a list of 74 developing countries with more than 100 billion hectares of tropical forests between them, from Argentina to Kenya to Vietnam, but they'd only be eligible for payments if they have an annual deforestation rate of less than 0.5%. This will be monitored through the satellite imaging. Thus, that quality will receive a fixed amount, perhaps $4, for every hectare of forest they hold. This payout will be reduced at a punitive rate for every hectare they destroyed. Countries will be asked to report on how they use funds and must ensure that it's at least a fifth goes to local communities and indigenous peoples. The hope is that if governments have a real financial incentive to reduce deforestation, they will in turn after the incentives for people on the ground. The expected income for Brazil at more than $100 billion would be more than triple the Environment Ministry's current annual budget, Aquina said. Rafael Dubois, a finance ministry official involved with the plan, argued that this interest-bearing model has more chance of attracting serious sums from rich world governments than a sham reliant on donations. Major economies across much of the developed world have slashed their foreign and aid budget over the past year. A group of six wealthy nations France, Germany, Norway, the UK, and the United Arab Emirates, and before Donald Trump took office, the US, have been involved in the consultations on the scheme at last year's COP29 summit. Rich nations agreed to take the lead in mobilizing $300 billion a year in climate finance for developing countries. Despite the constrained budgets, most of those countries will want to keep engaged in the agenda, Dubois told me. But risks to the sham around Lula is set to announce a Brazilian contribution to the new fuel fund later this month. Will other nations follow and will they provide the kind of sums Brazil is hoping for, or something on the far more modest scale of amounts committed to the United Nations Fund for Climate Loss and Damage? Even if rich world governments prove enthusiastic, will private sector of investors follow suit? With the junior debt investors agreeing to take the first hit from any losses, the fund could offer commercial investors a low-risk investment that would attract your regular Danish pension fund, argued Aquino. This claim is supported by rigorous modeling and analysis of historical bond market performance, said Christopher Agent Warburton, founding partners of Lions Head Global Partners and a former Goldman Sachs banker who worked on structuring the proposal.